Hey everybody, it's Mark Finkel-Pearl. This is Jeffrey Himes, and this is Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs. Jeffrey, I'm excited because today we're sharing with our audience our conversation with Oliver and Chris Wood together. They are the Wood brothers. This conversation exceeded my expectations, and I don't know exactly what I was expecting. But these guys are incredibly, besides being talented, incredibly thoughtful individuals. Tell our audience what they need to know about the Wood brothers before we throw to this piece.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite rock and roll bands these days. It's sort of an odd combination. Chris Wood was well known as one third of Medeski Martin Wood, which was an instrumental jazz band. Uh, Oliver Wood was sort of regionally well known in the Southeast as the lead singer songwriter for King Johnson, which was a kind of roots rock band based in Atlanta. And both of those bands were sort of winding down uh, in the early part of the century. And the two brothers decided to try working together, which they had not really done since they were teenagers. And it seems an unlikely match, a jazz bassist and a blues rock singer-songwriter. But unlikely as it seems, they're both really talented and it meshed really well. And they also found a third partner in John O'Ricks, who's not actually a brother, but has become an integral part of this band. And this interview will tell that story and why their new album, Puff of Smoke, is one of the year's highlights.
And Puff of Smoke is available now. And we will also be posting, of course, a playlist for this conversation. So without further ado, here is our talk with the Wood brothers. Hey, we're really excited to have Oliver and Chris Wood here today on Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs together, the Wood brothers. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for coming aboard. We're thrilled to have you. And you guys know Jeff Himes.
We do. Thank you all for having us today.
Yeah, good to be here.
And this is my partner, Mark Finkel-Pearl, and we're glad to have you as our one of our early interviews on this podcast. And I wanted to ask you about a song on the new Puff of Smoke record, which is called "Slow Rise to the Middle," which is a song about saying, we don't really trying to have a sort of quick rise to the top. We're trying to have a slow rise to the middle, and to have a certain amount of success that is not overwhelming or corrupting, or however you want to put it. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the genesis of that song and the sort of how it reflects on, what you're doing as a band.
Yeah, well,
kind of as a joke.
Yeah.
Started as a joke.
As so many great songs do. So
I think it's something that came out of Oliver's mouth at some point, just kind of as a self-deprecating, half joke, half truth about our career. For many years, it seems like we'd go back to the same club and there was always more people, but just a few more. It wasn't like all of a sudden we got a big break or something, So we're always going in the right direction. And I think it sort of became an inside joke to the band that we'd sort of, it would come up in interviews, it'd come up when we talk, but then, and of course, as you analyze, the reason the joke works is because you think of like people who've had a meteoric rise to the top, but like horrible things happen. And of course, in the rock and roll lore, there's plenty of stories of, people having horrible deaths or plane crashes or choking on their vomit or what have you. And I think over time, it was like, what, actually, Slow Rise to the Middle is not bad. It's not bad.
Because you sort of, allude to Neil Young and Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jim Morrison in the lyrics, and assume that was intentional. And can you talk a little bit how we start with a sort of a catchphrase like that? you flesh it out into a whole song.
Yeah. Well, I think, like Chris said, we kind of got inspired by what is the opposite of a slow rise to the middle, and those who did have meteoric rises, or those who had stardom at a young age, and then one way or another they were drowned, or somebody shot them, or they died in a
Mhm.
and so I think it just gave us. I think when we decided to how to make this song work, we were thinking about just imagery from, without being too obvious and too specific, using imagery from uh, famous things. You mentioned Stevie Ray Vaughan goes down in a chopper, or Jeff Buckley drowned in the Mississippi River, for instance, or Jim Morrison has a grave in Paris, and um, and that sort of became a fun way to figure out images and throw it together.
And when you're writing songs like this, what's the sort of division of labor? I mean, are all three of you throwing out words and music, or how does that work?
Yeah, I'll let Chris take that one.
I mean, it works all kinds of ways. I think it can start with lyrics. It can start with a riff. Um, I think we were on tour, and it just struck me that, like, this idea of slow rise to the middle, it's got to be a song. And so I started messing around with it. And this idea of just, I want to make it big. I want to make it big, because it's like, or you want to make it big. I mean, it sort of went back and forth, to first person, second person, third person, and what's the best way to get the point across? Because of course we all dream of being rock stars, but then this was like, but maybe there's some red flags.
Right.
So, but this idea, this chant of, like, I want to make it big, I want to make it big, want to make it big. That, I think it began with that, and the progression, the idea in the progression, that I can't even remember how conscious this was, but and it becomes more obvious in the outro, is from House of the Rising Sun. So it's like taking musical information that we're familiar with, that alludes back to some classic stuff, combined with lyrics. So when we came up then with the verses, that's where we just kind of let our imaginations go all over the place, with, like, brainstorming every classic rock album, classic band, classic tragedy, rock tragedy, pop tragedy. A lot of those came out before we sort of settled on.
Yeah, and I will add, just to your question too, as far as the division of labor, like Chris said, there's no really one way that we write songs, but I think, like, in that case, and this is often the case, one of us will have an idea and get started on it and bring it in. So Chris sort of started this song, and then we started collaborating on the lyrics. He came up with this cool riff that ended up being a guitar and bass riff, and I think that's often the case. And we do a lot of improvising when we're just backstage or warming up, or rehearsing. We'll just do a lot of improvising, where we just try to sort of have musical conversations, and oftentimes we discover musical ideas that way, record them on a phone, or we might happen to be in the studio, and then somebody takes those songs. Like, I've had a lot of luck just recording Chris and Jono playing, and they come up with this really great. That was true for instance, for another song called "The Trick." And John and Chris just had this amazing thing, and I was like, I have to record this. And that happens at sound checks. It happens all the time, and sometimes it's all three of us. But we keep these musical seeds, and then those often inspire lyrics, or those often get joined together with lyrics that have been sitting in a notebook.
There's often an assumption that the singer writes all the lyrics, but that's not necessarily the case in your band, right?
Not necessarily. There's always a point where we bring things together and just all pitch in.
And in that song too, there's a sort of dilemma that a lot of musicians have, because you do want to make it in the sense you want to, like, be able to pay your mortgage and um, pay your grocery bills, but and you don't want it to, like, ruin your life and turn you into a tabloid fodder. on the other hand, and how do you find that sweet spot between the two?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think
I think,
we're at a point where we're
taking it slow
grateful.
was the answer.
Yeah. Not that we necessarily always had a choice. Like, we worked really hard, and it just so happened that we were just lucky that we didn't blow up
Right.
too big, bigger than we can handle. It's kind of just exactly what we could handle, and actually sustainable, and we can make a living and buy our groceries. And most importantly, I think, is play the music that we want to play. We're not having to play one hit for somebody every night. We can write and play anything we want. We're that independent and that stable at this point, and that's a super grateful for that.
Right.
Yeah.
This sort of
I think,
brings
I think fame, extreme. Yeah. Sorry.
So it brings to mind, in some ways, your most popular song, which is "Postcards from Hell," which is about this blues singer who, says, "I have a soul that I won't sell." There's a sort of a line that he draws between what he'll do and what he won't do.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about how that song came into being and why it's become such a favorite of the show, such a high point of the shows?
Yeah. Well, that song originally, so musically, Chris at one point in a really perfect time in my life shared with me some African guitar music, and a sort of African folk music players who just have a very simple yet unique style, with a capo up high on a guitar, sometimes a cheapo guitar. And so I got really inspired by that, and stole a riff off of something, and it sort of turned into this song about an actual hero and mentor of mine that Chris and I got to play with a few times, and I played a lot with when I lived in Atlanta. His name was Donnie McCormick, and he was just one of those people you really look up to for their artistry and for their commitment, and how they somehow uh, transcend everything. It doesn't matter if there's people watching. It doesn't matter what's going on. If he's on stage and singing, he is in that moment so deeply and lost in it. And uh, so anyway, Chris and I have been playing that song for years, and it's become um, one that just, for me, it makes me think of mentors in general. And Chris is my mentor. We've been playing together now for 20 years. We went through a long time before we started the Wood Brothers, before we got to play together and realized what a cool thing it could be. And we've turned that song into all kinds of things, but oftentimes it's become a really neat bass feature for Chris to really do his thing, which is a very unique thing. And Chris gets into that zone too that we're talking about with Donnie McCormick, and it's fun to celebrate that.
Yeah, I think everyone's drawn to the idea of being in the spotlight. But then the trick is, how do you be in the spotlight and still be completely yourself, or be relaxed, just as relaxed and lost in the music as you may be all alone in your room, And that's an art. There's a practice. There's almost a spiritual practice that allows you to learn how to do that. And I think we've learned over the years that the more control you try to have over playing in the moment, over controlling writing a song, whatever it may be, whatever the creative act may be, the worse it goes, the more it derails it. And so it's this little by little, with our slow rise to little middle, we've been able, through extensive trial and error over the years, to learn that you have to do the opposite of try, and simply pay attention to what's happening in that moment. And that's what, through years of playing music and building trust, that we can do this if we just stop messing it up by getting in the way. Little by little, you learn how to just let go and trust your environment, and be like Donnie McCormick, even in the white hot spotlight, and let it all hang out, be vulnerable, be exposed, be naked, almost to the point you disappear and you're just reacting to everything that's happening around you. And that's the ultimate high, is that experience. And
Can you explain a little further what you mean by the opposite of try?
well, there's a part of you, if you kind of look at your psyche, there's a spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum is the part of your psyche that puts a lot of effort into the things because it takes credit for things. It's like, I did this well, I get a pat on the back, or I screwed it up, and so I'm gonna be angry at myself. On the other end of the spectrum, it's not a doer, it's the opposite of the doer. It's just you're receiving information, pure senses, no thought. It's just all your senses are receiving information. And it doesn't mean you can't do things on that side of the spectrum, but you do it instantaneously. It's like you're a mirror to your environment. And that takes trust in order to stay on that side of the spectrum and act appropriately in the moment. Takes learning how to be there, like trusting it, and not suddenly thinking and trying to take control again. So that's what I mean. It's like instead of, if you're having difficulty on stage, instead of tensing up and trying harder with your muscles, you do the opposite. You breathe and relax and get loose and play lighter and do everything even lighter and dance with what's happening instead of like trying to control it with effort. And that way, what's beautiful is, like, our heroes, I think, when we were younger, were these guys that were not only great at music, but when they screwed up on stage, they didn't beat themselves up. They did the opposite. They laughed.
Mm.
They made a mistake and they laughed, and it became this beautiful opportunity to be vulnerable, connect with the audience, and maybe even make something musical happen that was better than what they'd planned. So that's what I'm talking about,
Oliver was talking a minute ago about how you get these scraps of ideas. It could be a line of lyric, or it could be a rhythm, or it could be a guitar figure. But then there seems to be that there is some craft in turning those into a song. And how do you use that craft without contradicting what Chris was just talking about?
It's really hard, and I think I think what another word I would add to Chris's description of trying is judgment. It's when you're in that trying too hard zone, you are basically judging. Like Chris said, you either pat yourself on the back or you kick yourself for making mistakes. And I think that one way, I mean, we're quite aware of the times when we are stuck in our heads like that. And
Mhm.
so, and it's a forever quest. There's no mastery of it. But I will say, at our best, when we're writing and when we are recording, I'll add that too. And when we're playing live shows, if it's playful and somehow childlike and playful, and you are you get into that zone where, hey, this is fun. There's nothing at stake here. We can do anything we want. The future is wide open. I think that's one way we avoid that judgment and avoid that trying too hard thing. We don't get too attached to things. We wait till everybody loves something. All three of us really like something, and then we feel like, okay, that means it's good, and we're that was really fun to do. And I think that's a big part of it, to the point where we've tried to set ourselves up to be in that situation. Like when we're in the studio, we try to remove create limitations. I mean, there are always time limitations, but it's nice to create technical limitations too, where, okay, we're going to use a tape machine, no screen, no computer, and we only have 16 tracks, go. And somehow that makes it more fun and challenging and keeps us present and in the moment, rather than judging and tensing up,
Right. So Oliver,
I think in music, there's an assumption. There's an assumption that improvisation is something that you just do in free jazz or some, like jam music. But improvising is something we try to do all the time. So even in songwriting, it's ultimately you're improvising. It's just like when something good happens, you might write it down and keep it for later. But that's that feeling of just like reacting instantaneously is something you try to keep even when you're writing a piece of music. And I think any composer that's comes up with something good, that's what's actually happening. You know, it's not like preconceived notions. It's being open to, like, okay, here's what I got so far, and then I'm just going to instantaneously feel what the next thing should be that makes sense. Nobody knows where that comes from.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's why it's never boring, because you have no idea where those things come from. That's kind of the miracle of music. It's like, why did I think of that next thing? But it completely makes sense now in hindsight. But I didn't think of that before. I just played what I had, and when I ran out of the notes written, this new idea came. Where does that come from? So it's the same thing when playing a solo, exact same thing. Like, you don't know where that stuff comes from. It just seems right because you're reacting to the rhythm and the harmonies that are happening all around you. And it's this instantaneous reaction. It's not thought. And that's the greatest thing. Even if you're writing a song or if you're like actually improvising a solo or something, it's all the same exact headspace and
Right.
sense of presence, you know?
Right. So Oliver, you mentioned a minute ago that you've been playing together as brothers for 20 years, but before that there was a long period where you weren't. And I know Mark is interested in this, you know, the history of
I'm interested in that, but look, yeah, there's a sibling thing going on here, and that's always interesting to talk about. But you know, being a fly on the wall in this conversation so far has been fascinating, and I've been listening with great concentration. But you hear artists talk about the nature of creativity, but you don't hear them. I've never heard anybody talk quite from this perspective of almost um, a Zen perspective, but also a psychological perspective about getting into, you know, you're talking in a way about getting into that zone that is undefinable. And it's really fascinating. Chris, you mentioned your heroes and who you used to listen to. Oliver, you've got Tom Waits over your shoulder.
I do.
What's that? What's that? Why is Tom Waits in your living room? And who were your heroes as you guys were growing up? Who were your influences?
I got Sister Rosetta Tharpe on the other
There
side.
she is. There she is. Yeah, you need a wide lens, my friend.
Yeah. I don't want to give it all away here. Well, I'll tell you what. What's really cool, like Chris and I are 4 years apart. I'm 4 years older than Chris. We did both get very passionate about music as teenagers and shared a lot of the same ideas and records and sort of taught each other things. And then, as you know, we moved out and went in different directions. I ended up in the South. Chris ended up in the Northeast. And then we had 10 to 15 years of doing our own thing with other people. And that's kind of how that worked. But I will say, like, my early guitar influences which were also style influences for both of us, were things that our father was a really great folk singer and guitar player. So he loved playing all the time, and I think we were exposed to that, not really understanding how good we had it and how much of an influence he would be. But his record collection was absolutely a tangible influence, and so the stuff that I think I was first really into was like Lightnin' Hopkins, for instance, and uh, sort of the country blues stuff. Although there was also some Chicago things, Jimmy Reed, and then Muddy Waters and stuff like that. But I always come back to Lightnin' Hopkins, just because it was so accessible, so exotic compared to the Beatles or something, but also very accessible. Like as a early guitar player, just going, I think I can do that. It's not that technical. It's just I'll never be that good, but it's something within reach. And so that was certainly a big early influence for me before I got into Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. And I think you know, Chris and I have always liked a lot of the same roots things that even while he was playing with Medeski, Martin, and Wood, which is more of an instrumental group, and I was playing in Atlanta in blues bands, and eventually King Johnson, which was more of a roots sort of fused together all kinds of stuff. But Chris and I always loved like New Orleans music and the Meters and Alan Toussaint
Hmm.
and I think it was probably Chris who turned me on to people like Mingus and made me more interested in people like Miles Davis and Charles Mingus and stuff like that. So, and then eventually I would get into uh, the band and Lowell George and Little Feat and Los
Yeah.
Lobos when I was in college. That was still to this day, Los Lobos is one of my
Hmm.
bands. But I think always liked those elements to experience watching those elements, but also incorporating them and borrowing from them and creating our own recipe with those things.
Yeah. Well, now, but in terms of the sibling dynamic, you have an interesting story in so much as you didn't start to play together professionally until much later.
Yeah.
But what was, there are all these, you know, from the Everly Brothers to the Robinsons and the Dickinsons and, the Almonds. I mean, what's the dynamic between the two of you guys? How does your childhood creep up
Yeah.
in what you do together?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that we're grateful for is that we didn't start the band as teenagers. We started it when we were already in our, I don't know, mid to late 30s or something. We'd already had a significant amount of humbling music career before we started playing together. There was a good 15 years or so that I was playing with Medeski, Martin, and Wood, and Oliver was playing with King Johnson and touring and just experiencing the highs and the lows of the business. And by the time we decided to start doing something together, we both were seasoned, I think, enough and respected each other a lot about each other's strengths and what we were into. And so we didn't really know what we were going to do, but we knew what we weren't going to do based on what we had done each individually. And somehow we're going to find like a blend of that. I mean, I always in my head fantasized Mingus meets Robert Johnson and what kind of band would they come up with, so it was kind of fun to bring all the crazy fringy kind of music that I was influenced by from MMW, aside from all the stuff that both Oliver and I were already influenced by together. But and just think, well, how else could you take a song, but add some interesting flavors and elements and rhythms and sounds, and what else can we do and still have it be a song that feels accessible, soulful, repeatable, sing along? How can all those things work together? And I think over the years, we've just been experimenting with that nonstop. And especially with our third member, John O'Ricks, who has so much to offer musically, so many great ideas, can do so much, play amazing piano, drums, sing, can do it all at the same time, has a whole range of influences from all over the world. So that's what's fun and never gets old for us is combining and integrating so many influences that we do have, and we kind of, it's taken a long time to do, we're just on this record for the first time really more obviously including maybe some Latin influences, Cuban influences, Mediterranean, Caribbean kind of stuff. And there's a lot more where that came from. So,
So Chris, could you talk a bit about, why you went into instrumental jazz for a long period, and then, what interest led you in that direction? And then when you came to this project, what were the challenges of adding words to the music?
Well, like Oliver mentioned before, our dad was this great folk singer who knew like 400 songs and would sing in the house. So the idea of singing and playing music was something I had as a kid. We both had, and then I did a lot of singing and my first bands, like in junior high and high school, and had a rock band, and I was in all the choirs, singing magical music and concert choir, and I had a theatrical streak and was doing plays and doing musicals, and I was like Oliver Twist, or I was in cabaret, and so there was plenty of and then we haven't talked about our mother, who was a published poet. So there was lots of and I even worked with her and took her creative writing class. So there was lots of writing and words going on as a kid. At a certain point, I got really lucky. I had an amazing young hotshot bass player in the Denver Boulder area, who took me under his wing, really turned me on to jazz. He gave me a cassette with Stan Getz on one side and Thelonious Monk on the other side. And at first I'm like, I get the Stan Getz. Okay, I like this jazz stuff. And then over time, the Thelonious sounded weird to me. And then over time, I fell in love with the Thelonious Monk side, and I could care less about the Stan Getz side. And then eventually, that led me to all kinds of great music, and to Mingus and to jazz. And so I became a real jump to the New England Conservatory, where Dave Holland was teaching. So I just took a deep dive into the jazz world. That's where I met John Medeski in the Boston, New York area, and we started Medeski, Martin and Wood. So
and who was that?
Like, it wasn't a conscious thing. It's just one thing led to another.
Who was that person in Colorado got you started?
So I got really lucky there. So Rob Cassinger was his name. He was a young hotshot player. He could play a great electric bass, great acoustic bass, upright bass. He can play all styles. He did jazz gigs and rock gigs and funk gigs, but he also then was a great classical player. And I think he's still in the Chicago Symphony. And then in high school, this was before high school. In high school, the jazz band director at the high school was a professional gigging bass player in the Denver area. So then he took me under his wing. So it was like one of those 10,000 hour things. I got really lucky with some early mentors, like really great, and then after that ended up working in the Denver area professionally before I went to school, and ended up studying with Dave Holland and then a bunch of other great teachers. So I just was lucky,
Right. Can you talk about the time when King Johnson and Medeski Martin Wood played in Winston-Salem, that sort of famous night when the two bands were on the same stage the same night, and I think Oliver sat in with Medeski Martin Wood for a few numbers, and what was the epiphany that came out of that evening?
Well, we talked before about brother bands and the maybe the pitfalls, and Chris mentioned how we were fortunate maybe that we had all those years apart before we started working together, and I think part of that was so that we could it gave us time to not only become musicians but kind of become ourselves and get our individual identity sorted out a little bit, so leaving a little less baggage that some of the bands might have who played all their lives together. And but during that time, I think Chris and I really grew apart, just because of proximity, and we were just in different circles, and we rarely saw each other, and we didn't really play together or anything. So it was just this fluke that I remember trying to get on that show. Because there any way, and talking to Chris's manager at the time, who was still our manager, and we got on that show, and it was amazing, and those guys were just incredible, and I was invited to sit in, and Chris and I had such a blast. And Chris describes it sometimes as looking in a mirror, and it really was like we had this unspoken psychic connection of some kind, where we could just anticipate each other, and it felt so natural. And that was from after not having played together since being teenagers, and so it was really an epiphany. And I think part of it was just like amazing. We both play music, and we have this language, and I think the subconscious part of it was, hey, we can connect again. We can be brothers again, and we can reunite with something, and this was sort of the glue that would help it happen. So so it was pretty special on many levels, not just a musical level, but on a connective level. Like, it gets us back into our groove as brothers, you know.
Are there other siblings in the family?
No,
Just the two of you.
correct.
So
And so,
go ahead, Jeff.
sorry. And so how did you go from that show to deciding to put an act together? And was it a full-time thing from the beginning, or was it a side project initially that grew, or how did that work?
Well, I think that show was the spark. We were like, wow, okay, there's something here. I think there was a bunch of then other things that sort of led to us like really getting serious about it. I think King Johnson was slowing down and maybe was not going to continue. The same thing with MMW. There was talk of like some of the other guys, at least one of the other guys didn't want to tour so much. That was how I made a living. So I was like, well, wow, okay, better start thinking then what's gonna come next. We made most of our money from playing shows. So, and it wasn't anything like imminent, or there was no exact date, but there was this feeling of like, all right, well, it's time to explore and try something. And so one of the first things that happened is we had a family vacation that was close enough to my house in upstate New York that I drove and met Oliver and our parents, and I brought this old National Steel guitar that I had and my upright bass and some recording equipment, and we just started messing around on that vacation. We had fun rearranging some of Oliver's existing tunes that he played with King Johnson for a duo, just to see what that was like, and then created some new stuff as well, and just recorded some improvising together that became seeds for songs. So then it came to the point where we're like, well, let's just record a little record together. And so we just, no record company, no budget. We're just like, let's just go in and do this for ourselves. And so we did that and recorded a group of songs. Our manager heard it and was like, hey, this is kind of actually good. And so MMW at the time was with Blue Note Records. Bruce Lundvall was still running Blue Note, and she gave it to Bruce Lundvall and he loved it. And so it turned out that record we thought we were making was the demo that got us a deal with Blue Note that then became our first record, Ways Not to Lose.
Mm-hmm.
So what came after that was a lot of touring in the cracks of, at least for me, in between the Medeski, Martin, and Wood tours. We would do Wood Brothers tours. So, go from the Medeski, Martin, Wood tour bus and then get in my minivan with Oliver, and we'd go hit all the little clubs. And it was a really intense, humbling, but fun experience, to just get out there and sort of start from scratch, because it was musically completely unrelated to Medeski, Martin, or Wood, so we were really starting.
Yeah, the first time I saw you guys was at the Folk Alliance, I think, in Memphis. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It's in a little hotel conference room. There was like a dozen people, and you guys just standing on the carpet next to us playing. And then
that's right.
And then now you're like, the last time I saw you was at Delfest when you were at the big stage. So it was a slow rise, but
yeah,
you hit the middle of the target, let's say.
Yeah.
We're getting there. Any minute now, we'll be in the middle.
Okay, the minivan to the bus with a trailer. Not bad.
Let's talk about
multiple buses.
Talk about Jono, how he entered the picture and what a difference that made.
Yeah, well, Jono, we met through some other musician friends. We were all on a tour, a multi-band tour, and we had been dabbling with the idea of having a permanent drummer. Chris and I were a duo for years, and we were starting to play bigger rooms. We were ready to add some sonic power and expand our sound a little bit. And So we did play with a few shows with other people, just sort of dabbling in it. But when we met Jono, we decided we really wanted something more permanent. And what's amazing about Jono is at the time, all we knew was that he was a great drummer. We had no idea that he could sing such great harmonies, that and no idea that he was just as good of a piano or keyboard player as he was a drummer.
Mm.
Um, so, which would, unfold over the years, because at first we were just adding drums, and then he would add a third harmony and just be like, wow, we got more than we thought we'd get out of this guy. And he's such a sweet guy. We also got just a really warm and inspired and inspiring person to be around. And then we heard him play piano, and we're like, holy crap. So he started playing all the keyboard stuff on recordings. And eventually, I don't remember how it evolved, but we were like, why can't you have a piano on stage, or a keyboard or something? And of course, he incorporated it into his drum kit. And now he's at the point, and has been for a while, of playing keyboards with his right hand while his other three limbs are still playing drums. And it's pretty cool to
Crazy.
watch. And it's like
Yeah.
one big instrument now,
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you guys are like a three-man sextet, because you have, you know,
Yeah.
lead vocal, guitar, bass, harmonica, keyboards, and drums. So
Yeah. 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 It's
Multitasking.
a lot of
That's what
multitasking. It's fun.
that's what
And
you got to do in this day and age. You got to, keep the overhead down. Just 'cause everyone's got to work 3 jobs.
That's right. And we did talk about, one of the cool things about a trio as opposed to a larger band is the limitation thing we talked about. We love working with, what we got. How can we pull this off? And I mean, between Chris and Jono, they're carrying a lot. Boy, they're multitasking big time.
So on this new album, you mentioned earlier that this sort of more Latin Caribbean kind of flavors sneaking in. There's that sort of overdriven Rhodes on the trick, that sort of really buzzing sound, and there's some horns on several cuts. And could you talk a little bit about, why you wanted to incorporate new sounds into the band's sound, and how you found what led you to these particular sounds?
Well, I think so. First of all, we're kind of blessed that we have our own studio here in Nashville that is sort of like our clubhouse and laboratory, and place that we can experiment, and where we've made our last several records. But I think, and Chris spoke to this earlier, but I think when we're making a new record and when we're in the recording studio, we're always trying to do something different from what we've done in the past. And we're always trying to keep that sort of playful, childlike frame of mind that we talked about earlier. And I think that those attitudes sort of lead us towards experimenting, and sometimes doing something counterintuitive, like, oh, that would be a classic thing for an acoustic guitar right now. Let's use an electric guitar instead, or let's do something that's completely the opposite of what first comes to mind. So sometimes it's a matter of not knowing what you want to do. That's different. Just knowing what you don't want to do, and then exploring the options. What haven't we tried yet? And what's this new weird pedal we can run the Fender Rhodes through, which is what Jono did on the Trick. And we've done cool things, like we mic Chris's Hofner bass. Instead of plugging it in, we just put a mic on it. And like he said, it sounds like a guitar or a baritone guitar. So it's experimental, and we have a really great engineer, Brooks Sutton, who's engineered our last few records, and he's got that same spirit. So we're just like a bunch of kids in a clubhouse trying stuff out.
Talk a little bit about the lyric approach.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of it's kind of like one of those list songs, like a Bob Dylan song where he just rambles off a lot of things. But I think some of this speaks to what Chris said earlier about when we were talking about being in the moment and not judging what you're doing, and just paying attention.
Mm.
And so I think there's a lot of angles to this song, and some of them are very tongue in cheek, and it's not necessarily that deep. But I do like the idea of, like you were talking about Zen, or the Buddhist idea of, just you're watching things happen, or you are not your feelings. If you're stressed out, or if you're angry, you are not that angry, that anger. You are not that. You can watch it. You can witness it. You don't have to be attached, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have an addiction or whatever, you are not those things, and so you can free yourself of those things. And I think some of it's just silly euphemisms, or it's just kind of a blend of what sang together. Some words were chosen because they're funny and they sang well. you know I think of some of these things are like, if you think of John Prine, for instance, who was just great at, there was always humor, but there was always some depth to it somehow. Underneath that, you could pull some feeling that was not purely humor. Sometimes it's real tragedy, or sometimes it has to do with faith.
Mm-hmm. And if if I'm mistaken or not, are there other people singing leads on this album besides Oliver?
Yeah, Chris has 3 songs on there he's singing lead.
Okay. All right. And John isn't singing lead on this record.
No.
Okay.
No. But he sings all the impossibly high harmonies that we cannot get.
So one more thing before we let you go. Over the years, you've often performed the band's Ophelia in your shows, and what is it about the band and Los Lobos, which their version of I Got Loaded, the swamp pop tune, you also do sometimes. What is it about those two outfits that are important touchstones for you?
I mean, I first got introduced to the band because with Medeski, Martin, and Wood, a friend of ours made a comment one time. This is after we were touring a lot. We were like brothers, but he also was a close friend. So he saw the tension, he saw the fighting, but he saw the love, he saw the musical collaboration. And I remember one day he was like, "You guys are like the band." Like, he just for some reason felt like vibe wise, not like we're playing the same music, but just like our lives, the way we were living in a shack together in Hawaii during off touring periods. Like, it was like we were really like the band had the Big Pink, and they're living in this house together, and like there's such part of their lives, like family together, but also there was tension because of that. And so I was like, well, the band, that's the name of the group? What? And so I started getting familiar with that, and getting familiar with their music. Eventually I'd moved to upstate New York, and I was living 15 minutes away from Levon. And I ended up having a group with Levon Helm's daughter, Amy, up there. And then we were playing the Rambles and got to know Levon a little bit. So it actually became a part of our lives, literally, and he was such a force, just such an amazing personality, a spirit, the way he played, the way he approached music, the way he approached rhythm, the giant shit-eating grin on his face while he's playing, like the way he enjoyed it, was very influential, and of course the music too. So and Los Lobos, yeah, I mean, as kids, Oliver's a little older. He had that cool record collection before I did, so I was basically listening to what he was listening to. And man, I remember when he got Will the Wolf Survive, that record. It was that was going a lot in the house, and that became a big influence. And then again later on, like with Medeski, Martin, and Wood, when they came out with Colossal Head, we did a tour with them for that record. And so we got to see them playing all that Colossal Head music live. So that was a big influence for MMW as well, just witnessing the musicality, the way they produced that record, the way they wrote songs together, the sounds, the weird creative rhythmic stuff they came up with, and it was a vibe that we were influenced by on many levels.
I would add too that I think what draws us to these bands is they somehow have a balance between honoring tradition and traditional music and innovation. It's like somehow they take these traditions, and often they're just roots, whether blues, gospel, rock and roll, jazz even, and somehow innovate and blend things in and have combinations that you haven't heard before. They base their sound on it, and I feel like Los Lobos, when they got to that album Colossal Head, or the album Kiko before that, they started really experimenting, and they had really mastered some traditional music of their own, and then they just wanted to go further, and I feel like that's what we're trying to do too, and I think that's what the band did, and Little Feat, and I think that's what draws us to it, because we love the traditional music so much, and it's already been done in its purest form, like by the original best people. So what else can we do with it? Well, we can create new versions of it that somehow reflect all our different influences and blend them together,
And those bands, everybody in those bands matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like that you need them all to
Right.
create that sound.
Exactly.
I think that's why we think of them as a band, as opposed to like a great artist with like great studio musicians backing them up or whatever. We're talking about a band. There's a family. It's personalities that are somehow learning to live together, to tour together, to find restaurants together, to sound check together, to write music together, sleeping together in a bus. Like, these are more than just musicians hanging out playing music together. They're like this weird social experiment that worked for many, 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 many years and created all kinds of music, and it can't be recreated. It's singularly unique. And that's, I think, the attraction is that as much as anything.
Exactly. It's a unique chemistry that cannot be duplicated.
Great.
All right, guys, this has been a really fun conversation. So
thank you.
We appreciate all the time.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, guys.
Best of luck with your enterprise here. Thank you so much.
Okay, good to see you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Take care, gentlemen.
Take care.
Bye-bye. I wasn't expecting this thing to go into, Zen Buddhism or whatever, but man, these guys are thoughtful. What do you take away from all of that?
Well, I've talked to them before, but it was great. I like the give and take between the four of us, so that it was like a round table conversation, which was really good. We have some other podcast interviews coming up that I'm really looking forward to. Daryl Scott, the multi-instrumental whiz, who's worked with everybody from Robert Plant to Tim O'Brien to Guy Clark, has written songs like You'll Never Leave Harlan Alive and Long Time Gone, and has his own sort of thriving solo career. So that's going to be a great one. And then also Amy Rigby, who's started out in that sort of New York punk scene and went to Nashville and became a sort of important singer-songwriter, married Reckless Eric from the Stiff Records scene in London, and now has the second volume of her autobiography coming out. So that will be a great conversation too.
I'm excited about Amy because I'm from Pittsburgh and she's from Pittsburgh. But we'll see you all next time on Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs. Thank you for all the support.